Megan, a 37-year-old forest ranger, moved slowly along one of the familiar trails she had walked countless times before. The storm from the previous night had left the forest dripping and silent, as if the trees themselves were still holding their breath. Rainwater clung to every leaf and branch, creating a steady rhythm of drops hitting the undergrowth. The trail was slick, the soil loose underfoot, and the scattered leaves clung stubbornly to her boots. The scent of ozone still lingered in the air, mixing with the deep, earthy smell of pine and wet bark. She walked with careful steps, scanning the canopy above for broken limbs and checking the ground for any fallen trunks. Her jacket was damp, the collar pulled high, and her breath came in quiet clouds. The woods were gray, saturated with moisture and silence. A few birds had begun to stir, but even their songs felt tentative. Several kilometers in, she noticed it. A large tree had splintered and collapsed across a narrow bend in the path. Its trunk was thick and old, the bark torn back where it had struck the slope. Branches fanned out across the forest floor, tangled in ferns and moss, crushing a section of shrubbery beneath it. Fractured wood jutted in sharp angles from the broken stump, and clumps of damp earth had been thrown outward in the fall. She slowed, stepping over twisted roots, adjusting her pack. But it wasn't the tree that held her attention. There was a dog beneath it. She sat motionless at the base of the fallen trunk, her body pressed into the soft, muddy earth like she had grown there. Medium-sized, with dark fur soaked through to the skin, her outline looked more like a shadow than a living thing. The rain had matted her coat, clinging to her legs and back, but she didn't shiver. She didn't blink. She simply sat, unmoving, as if tethered by something unseen. Megan stopped several paces away. She crouched slowly, not wanting to startle her, and waited. The dog's eyes were open, dry, deep. They stared forward, past Megan into the underbrush. There was no fear in them, no hostility, no recognition, only weight, like she was carrying something too heavy to put down. The forest around them fell still. The wind had stopped, the rain had slowed to the occasional drop falling from above. The only sound was Megan's breathing and the faint rustle of her boots as she adjusted her stance. And then she heard it. A soft, muffled sound, faint, broken, like air escaping through cloth. A whimper. Not from the dog, but from beneath the tree. Megan leaned forward, heart slowing, ears straining. The sound came again. Quieter now, fragile and far too small to belong to anything grown. Somewhere beneath the weight of the broken trunk, something was still alive. Megan retraced her steps quickly, her boots slapping against the slick earth as she made her way back to the trailhead where her truck was parked. The canopy above shivered with the remnants of the storm, droplets falling from leaf to leaf like hesitant thoughts. When she reached the vehicle, she pulled open the back hatch and began collecting what she thought she might need. A compact shovel, a flashlight, a small medical kit, and an emergency thermal blanket she kept folded behind the seat. Before closing the door, she hesitated, then grabbed a sealed pouch of dog food and a collapsible bowl. As she walked back through the woods, her hand moved to her radio. She called into her colleague, Rick, another ranger who knew this stretch of forest almost as well as she did. He answered quickly, and when she explained the situation, injured dog, possible trapped pup, his voice grew cautious. He promised to try to reach her, but warned the downed trees from last night's storm might block his approach. He asked her not to get too close without help. Megan said she understood, but she couldn't wait. By the time she returned to the fallen tree, the light had shifted again. Afternoon shadows stretched long between the trunks, and the forest had returned to a state of quiet so complete it made her ears ache. The dog was still there, unmoved, but when Megan stepped into view, the animal's head turned. Their eyes met, briefly. The dog didn't growl, didn't stand, but there was a flicker of awareness now. Recognition without trust. Megan placed the folded blanket on a patch of dry leaves a few feet away and set down the bowl of food beside it. The rich scent of meat filled the air, but the dog didn't react. Her gaze returned to the tree. The whimpering continued, but it had grown softer, slower, as if the tiny creature beneath was slipping toward a quieter place. Megan approached the trunk carefully, noting the way the bark had splintered. The tree had fallen at an angle, one end slightly propped on a tangle of roots. The soil there had given way, creating a small hollow beneath the wood. It wasn't much, but it was space, enough maybe to reach into. She dropped to her knees, wiping rain and dirt from her gloves, then stretched out flat on the ground. Pulling the flashlight from her jacket, she angled the beam beneath the trunk and peered into the darkness. A tiny puppy lay there, pressed close to the earth. Its body was nearly still, the fur slick with damp soil, the chest rising in weak, uneven rhythm. Its eyes were sealed shut, and its limbs trembled faintly. Megan guessed the pup was no more than 5 or 6 days old. Too small to move far, too young to understand what had happened. Yet somehow, it had survived the fall, the storm, the long night alone. She exhaled slowly. The opening was narrow, but with patience, it could be widened. She would need to clear away the debris carefully, branches, wet soil, loose stones. A mistake could collapse the pocket or injure the puppy. She marked the edges in her mind, calculating where to begin. Behind her, the dog had not moved. She turned her head to look. The mother still sat near the base of the tree, eyes locked on Megan's hands, on the flashlight beam, on the space beneath the trunk. Her body was tense, but she made no move to interfere. She didn't step forward, but she didn't retreat either. She simply watched, breath slow, unmoving, like the forest itself had gathered behind her in silent witness. Megan felt the line of it then, the threshold between doing too much and doing nothing, between observing grief and entering it. She pressed her palm gently against the damp soil and began to dig. Darkness fell quickly over the forest, sliding down the trees like a curtain pulled tight across the sky. The light that remained turned blue and indistinct, soaked up by the moss-covered trunks and the heavy, wet ground. A fine rain returned, barely more than a mist, but it was enough to dampen everything again. The trail behind Megan was already vanishing into shadow. The forest felt deeper now, older. The radio on her belt crackled faintly, then fell silent. Rick's voice had last come through over an hour ago, his tone frustrated. The road was blocked. The downed trees from the storm had made the trail impassable, and with night setting in, he'd had no choice but to turn back. Megan was alone. She accepted it without hesitation. Carefully, she unfolded the thermal blanket she had brought earlier and laid it across a patch of flat ground beneath a leaning cedar. It wasn't dry, but it was enough. From her pack, she took out a small fire starter kit and kindling wrapped in plastic. With practiced movements, she built a tiny fire, no larger than her 2 palms pressed together, and sheltered it between a ring of rocks. The flame sputtered at first, then steadied. Its flickering light cast warm tones against the trees, a fragile defiance in the cold blue hush of the woods. She sat close, legs tucked under her, jacket pulled tight. Her gaze flicked often to the dog. The mother still sat in the exact same place, eyes fixed on the fallen trunk. She hadn't moved, hadn't blinked it seemed, in hours. The firelight touched the edges of her soaked fur, giving her a faint glow like she had been carved from something darker than night itself. The air between them was dense, not with threat but with something heavier, something unspoken, shared. From beneath the tree the sound had grown fainter. The puppy's soft cries had thinned into long pauses, occasional gasps of air, the kind that squeezed the silence more than they broke it. Megan listened intently, straining to catch every breath, every sign of life. The forest had gone unnaturally still. No snapping twigs, no distant owls, no insects calling in rhythm. Even the rain made no sound against the pine needles now. It was as if the forest, too, was waiting. Hours passed. The fire burned low. Megan didn't sleep. Sometime after midnight, when her bones ached from stillness, she rose and stepped toward the base of the tree again. Her fingers were stiff, the metal of the shovel cold and dull. She knelt and began to work. The ground had turned soft from rain, clinging to the tool with every stroke. The roots of the tree were thick and gnarled, and she had to work around them. Every handful of soil she removed seemed to collapse inward again, but she kept going, carefully, precisely, pausing every few minutes to listen for the faint sounds within. There was no urgency in her movements, only rhythm, only resolve. The dog shifted once. It was the first time she had moved all night. She stood slowly, stretched her legs one at a time, and took a step toward Megan. Just one. She stopped a few feet away, close enough that Megan could see her breath in the dim light. Their eyes met. Megan didn't speak, didn't reach out. She simply waited. The dog watched her for a long, unmoving moment. Then, without a sound, she turned and lay back down near the tree, resting her head against her paws and closing her eyes. The rain had stopped, but the air stayed heavy. Megan continued to dig, not measuring time, only the depth of her reach. Dawn came slowly, slipping through the trees like a quiet breath. The sky was pale and heavy, colored in soft gray blue, as if the forest itself had forgotten what sunlight looked like. Megan's hands were numb, caked in wet soil, her arms trembling not from fear but from the toll of hours spent kneeling, digging, hoping. The small hollow she had carved beneath the tree was just wide enough, just deep enough. And finally, at the very edge of reach, her fingers closed around something warm. The puppy was slick with mud and damp leaves, no heavier than a handful of wet cloth. Its body was limp, but not still. The faint rise and fall of breath told her what she needed to know. It was alive. Barely. She pulled the pup close, wrapped him tightly in the towel she had stashed inside her coat, and pressed him to her chest. His tiny ribs moved in shallow waves, and when she adjusted her grip, he let out a hoarse, broken sound, half whimper, half exhale. Megan sank to the ground, the cold biting through the knees of her pants. She sat back against the nearest root and wrapped the thermal blanket around both of them, letting the heat of her body reach the fragile thing tucked beneath her collarbone. A branch snapped behind her, soft, deliberate. Megan turned her head. The dog had risen. She moved slowly, step by step, as though shaking off a weight she had carried far too long. Her eyes locked on the bundle in Megan's arms. Her movements were soundless, deliberate, and when she reached them, she didn't lunge or bark. She simply stood there, still, watching. Megan loosened the blanket slightly, revealing the puppy's face. The dog leaned forward, nose trembling, and paused a breath away. Then she touched her nose gently to the pup's fur. The puppy twitched at the contact, let out a weak squeak, and shifted in Megan's arms. Only then did the mother lower herself to the earth. She folded her legs beneath her, her body pressing into the damp soil beside them. Her head hovered close to the blanket, not touching, not demanding. Her breathing slowed. She closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them again. The space between them was quiet, but not empty. Megan didn't move. The three of them remained there, wrapped in silence. Woman, dog, puppy. Around them, the forest began to stir. The mist crept low across the ground, curling around roots and puddles, pulling itself slowly back toward the river. Above, light filtered through the branches like threads of gold unraveling from the clouds. The trees, still slick with rain, shimmered faintly in the new light. A crow called in the distance, and a squirrel darted across a branch, breaking the stillness for the first time in hours. But near the fallen tree, nothing moved but breath. The puppy shifted again, his tiny mouth parting slightly in sleep. The dog pressed closer, her body forming a curved shelter around him, and her eyes blinked slowly, once, twice, as though daring herself to believe it was real. Megan adjusted the blanket, not to separate them, but to share it. No words were needed. The silence was full. The kind of silence that knew what it had endured. The kind of silence that didn't need to explain anything. The next morning, with the forest still damp from the night's rain and the ground soft beneath her tires, Megan loaded the dog and the fragile bundle into the back of her truck. The mother stepped in without hesitation. There was no resistance in her body, only a calm, weary acceptance. She curled herself around the bundled puppy and stayed still for the entire ride. Megan drove carefully, glancing into the mirror often. The dog never looked at her. She looked only out the window, eyes steady, reflecting the pale gray sky as it passed. At the veterinary clinic on the edge of town, the staff were already waiting. Megan had called ahead. They moved quickly but gently, lifting the puppy from the blanket and placing him into a softly lit incubator where warmth and oxygen surrounded his small, underdeveloped lungs. He twitched once, responding to the new environment, and then settled back into sleep. The mother was examined next. They weighed her, listened to her heartbeat, ran a hand along her limbs, checked for fractures, injuries, internal bleeding. She flinched once when they touched a tender spot near her ribs, but otherwise remained calm. The diagnosis was simple: mild malnutrition, dehydration, and exhaustion. No open wounds, no visible trauma, just time, and the quiet kind of pain that doesn't leave marks. The veterinarians exchanged glances. They had seen many strays brought in after storms, after accidents, after nights too long to survive. But it was rare, almost unheard of, for a mother to stay. Most left when they couldn't save what was theirs. Most didn't wait. But this one had. She had waited without food, without shelter, without hope of being seen. She had stayed because there had been nothing else she could do. Megan stayed by her side during the entire exam. When it was finished, she signed the intake forms and told them she would foster them both until something permanent could be arranged. They entered the system under temporary names. The puppy, the one who had nearly slipped away beneath a fallen tree, was called Bram. The mother, who had given him every reason to survive, was named Lucy. Back at her cabin on the edge of town, Megan laid out a blanket near the sliding glass door, where morning light spilled across the floor. She placed a shallow bowl of food beside it and sat down quietly as Lucy stepped out of the crate and into the house. The dog moved slowly, sniffing the corners, mapping the edges of this new place. She paused by the door, then turned a slow circle and lay down. In the days that followed, the silence in Megan's home changed. It wasn't filled with barking or noise, or the chaos that usually comes with new animals. It was filled with presence. Lucy never begged, never demanded. She simply existed in the space, always close, but never in the way. When Bram was released from his incubator and brought home, he curled into the crook of her belly without hesitation, as if the days apart had not interrupted the thread that tied them together. Lucy began sleeping near the front door, not as a guard, not out of fear. She simply settled there, where she could watch the world come and go. Bram, growing stronger, slept on her chest or nestled against her side. Megan often found them in the mornings, tangled in a quiet pile, breathing in sync, unmoved even by the sounds of coffee brewing or boots on tile. Every day after work, Megan returned to that stillness and felt something subtle shift inside her. The thought of rehoming them had once felt reasonable. Now it felt hollow. They belonged to no one, and yet they had made themselves at home, not through attachment, but through acceptance. There was no noise between them, no insistence, just the steady, warm rhythm of two lives healing together. 3 months had passed, and the rhythm of Megan's life had shifted in quiet, permanent ways. The house no longer echoed with its former stillness. There were soft scratches on the hardwood floor in the mornings, the rustle of fur against fabric as Lucy settled near the window, and the low, playful growls of a growing pup testing his voice. Megan no longer noticed these sounds as intrusions. They were part of the home now, inseparable from its air and warmth. Lucy had not once tried to leave. She didn't follow Megan from room to room, nor did she seek attention like a dog eager to please. She simply existed in the same space, calm and unassuming, always near but never needy. She moved with a kind of quiet certainty, as if she'd already seen the worst the world could give and decided, now, she would let stillness be her answer. Bram had grown. His steps were larger, more clumsy, filled with the unsteady joy of a body still learning itself. He chased moths in the evenings and barked at shadows that passed across the porch, but no matter how far he wandered in play, he always circled back. When something startled him, a loud truck, a falling broom, he didn't run to Megan. He ran to Lucy. He would tuck himself under her chest, curl against her belly, hide beneath her front legs, and she would lower her head without a word. Spring came late that year. The forest stayed damp longer than usual, and the air remained cool deep into May. When the sun finally pushed through the clouds and warmed the soil, Megan took them both back to the woods. It wasn't planned. She just woke early one Sunday, loaded the truck with water and a blanket, and drove the long, winding road back to the trail. Lucy recognized the turn before they reached it. Her ears lifted. Her posture changed. Not tense, not afraid, but alert. When Megan opened the back, Lucy stepped out with slow steps. She walked ahead without direction, following a path the forest had almost hidden again. Bram bounded after her, full of energy, leaping over puddles, crashing through low brush. And then Lucy stopped. The tree was still there, moss-covered now, half sunk into the ground, its trunk softened by time. Vines had begun to creep over the broken bark. The clearing around it was smaller, overgrown, but still quiet, still sacred. Lucy stood a few feet from it, unmoving. Her tail didn't wag. Her head tilted slightly as she looked into the bramble beyond, as if something old still lived there. Some sound only she could hear. Then, slowly, she stepped closer to the base of the tree and sat. Bram joined her. He nosed at the grass, pawed at the dirt, then lowered himself beside her. His head rested against her shoulder. They didn't move. They didn't need to. Megan stayed a few steps back, her arms folded, a breeze brushing her cheeks. She didn't call to them. She didn't interrupt. There are families we build, and families we become. There are bonds formed not from need, but from presence. Lucy had never asked to be rescued. She had stayed when she could have run. She had waited when no one was coming, and in doing so she had drawn them all together, not as a pet, not as a project, but as something more ancient and essential. A pack, not chosen but found.